I never showed my daughter what I kept locked in that safe deposit box at First National. When she married the man I'd had a bad feeling about from day one, I made sure he never got anywhere close to knowing it existed. I was visiting my brother out in Tucson when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. My daughter was barely holding herself together. "Dad," she said, "he found the paperwork. Not all of it, but enough. He's on the phone right now with someone, I don't know who, and he's asking questions about your accounts." I'd been waiting for exactly this moment for 4 years. So I told her, "Don't say another word to him." Then I made the call I'd had saved in my phone since the week after their wedding. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I was sitting on my brother's back porch in Tucson, watching the sun go down behind the Catalinas, when my daughter called. His name was in my phone too, but I hadn't heard from him directly in months. That was by design. My daughter never interrupted me during travel, unless the house was on fire. So when I saw her name light up my screen twice in a row, I already knew. "Dad," she said when I picked up. Her voice had that tight, controlled quality that meant she was somewhere near him and trying not to let him hear her falling apart. "I need you to listen carefully." He found a folder in the filing cabinet. The one in the home office. It had your name on it and a bank address. "He's been on the phone for 20 minutes asking someone to look up the account number." I set down my iced tea, slowly. "Has he reached anyone?" "I don't think so. He keeps getting transferred." "But Dad, he took a photo of the documents before I realized what he was doing." 4 years. 4 years of keeping that box protected, of renewing the signature card every year, of making sure the only copy of the keys stayed on my own keychain. My late wife had insisted on it. She'd spent the last clear-headed months of her life making sure our daughter would be protected, even from people our daughter couldn't yet see clearly. "I need you to do 2 things," I told her. "First, go into a room where he can't hear you. Second, call our attorney. You have Gerald Hutchins's number. Tell him it's time to activate what we set up. He'll know exactly what that means." "Time to activate what?" Her voice cracked. "I'll explain everything when I land. Book me the first flight into Phoenix and I'll connect to Nashville from there." Behind her I could hear her husband's voice, low and even, the way it always got when he was working something out in his head. He had a talent for that, for sounding reasonable while doing unreasonable things. "Is that your father?" I heard him say. "Tell him to call me directly. Tell him we're all family here." My jaw tightened. Family. That word coming from his mouth had always felt like a costume he put on when he needed something. I hung up and pulled up the airline app. My brother stood in the doorway watching me with that expression he gets, the one that means he already knows, but he's waiting to hear it out loud. "It's starting," I said. He nodded slowly. "You've been ready for this for a long time." I had, but being ready doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. My wife Eleanor had seen it before I did. That was usually how it worked between us. I had the patience, she had the instincts. We'd been married 31 years when the cancer came back the second time. And even then, even when she was more tired than I'd ever seen her, her mind was still working, still planning, still thinking about our daughter. "She's going to need protection," Eleanor had told me one evening in the hospital. "Not from the world, from herself. From that thing she does where she loves someone so hard she stops seeing them clearly." I thought she was being a mother, worrying the way mothers do. I was wrong. The first time our daughter brought him home for Thanksgiving, he'd arrived 40 minutes late, blamed traffic, and spent the first 20 minutes of dinner asking about the neighborhood. "Nice area," he kept saying. "These houses have appreciated a lot, haven't they? What do you think something like this goes for now? Been in the family a long time." First red flag. You don't ask a man about property values before you finish the sweet potato pie. But our daughter was luminous that night. I hadn't seen her smile like that in years, not since before her mother got sick. And I understood it. I did. Grief makes you hungry for warmth. When someone comes along offering it, you reach for it without checking what's underneath. I kept my mouth shut that first night. I watched. Over the next several months, I kept watching. He had a way of steering conversations toward money that was almost artful. He'd ask about my career with this particular tone of admiration that always circled back around to what I'd accumulated. He'd mention his own financial struggles just enough to seem honest without ever actually asking for anything directly. He was smart, I'll give him that. But I'd spent 35 years in estate law before I retired. I'd seen every version of this play. I knew the moves before he made them. About 8 months after they started dating, our daughter mentioned over Sunday dinner that he thought it might be a good idea for her to understand more about the family finances. He'd said something about wanting her to feel secure, to know what her future looked like. They'd been together 8 months. Your future, I told her carefully, is built by your own hands, same as mine was, same as your mother's. She looked at me with that expression I'd come to dread, the one that meant she'd been worked on before she got to the table. He just wants us to be prepared, Dad. I hear that, I said, and I left it there. But that night I made my first entry in the notebook. When she told me they were engaged, I was sitting in my home office grading. I'd gone back to teaching part-time at the law school after Eleanor died. It kept me sharp, kept me out of the quiet. She called instead of coming by, which told me she was a little nervous about my reaction. I congratulated her. I meant it. I wanted her happy. I wanted her to have what Eleanor and I had shared, that particular kind of partnership where you trust someone so completely you don't even have to think about it. I just didn't believe he could give her that. 3 weeks before the wedding, I sat down with Gerald Hutchins and we went through everything. The house in Brentwood, Eleanor's life insurance policy, the investment accounts we'd built over 30 years of careful living. Gerald helped me restructure everything into a revocable trust with provisions I'd been thinking through since that first Thanksgiving dinner. The house stayed in the trust. The account stayed in the trust. Our daughter was the sole beneficiary. Her husband had no claim to any of it, not in the event of divorce, not ever. I also insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Gerald presented it as standard practice for families with established estates. Her fiancé had signed it at the table in Gerald's office downtown, barely skimming it, almost smiling. The smile of a man who thinks a piece of paper is just a delay, not a wall. He was wrong about that too. The wedding was in May, a venue outside Nashville. Rolling hills, white tents, the whole production. It cost more than I thought was wise, but Eleanor had left a specific fund for our daughter's wedding, so I let it be. What I noticed was who kept a running mental tally of every gift envelope, who asked the venue coordinator what the catering package ran per head, who, during the toast, made a joke about marrying into good taste that got a laugh from everyone except me and Gerald, who exchanged a look across the table. After the wedding, they moved into the house our daughter had bought 3 years earlier, on her own, before she'd ever met him. A solid investment she'd made with her own savings from 10 years of nursing. Within 3 months, he'd started in on how the house was too far from his office, how they needed more space, how maybe they should consider selling and upgrading somewhere together. His name on a deed alongside hers. She mentioned it to me on the phone one Sunday afternoon. I told her, that house is yours. You bought it before this marriage. It stays in your name. She sighed. You don't trust him, do you? It wasn't a question. I told her the truth. I trust the decisions you made before you met him. I'm less certain about the ones being made since. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mom would have liked him. I didn't argue. But I sat in my office for a long time after we hung up, looking at a photograph of Eleanor on my desk. My wife, who had spent her last month writing letters and setting up protections and telling me to watch out for exactly this. Eleanor would not have liked him. Eleanor would have had him figured out before the soup course. That was the night I opened the safe deposit box and added the first 20 pages of the notebook. The flight from Tucson to Nashville was 4.5 hours with the connection. I sat in a middle seat somewhere over Texas and thought about all of it. About the loan he'd convinced our daughter to co-sign for a business venture that had never launched. $42,000. About the joint credit card that only one of them seemed to be using. About the weekend trips to Atlanta and Charlotte where he went alone to, quote, meet with investors. About the way our daughter had started sounding smaller on the phone, more careful, like she was editing herself before she spoke. I'd written it all down. Every date, every dollar amount, every conversation I'd witnessed or that she'd reported to me without realizing what she was telling me. When I landed in Nashville and got to the house, both their cars were in the driveway. Her sensible Camry and the Lexus he talked her into co-signing. Her payments on his car. That detail had kept me awake more than once. She met me at the door. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red at the edges, and she was holding her phone against her chest, like it was something she needed to keep close. "He's in the living room," she said quietly. "He wants to talk." I stepped inside the house she had bought with her own money, in the neighborhood she had chosen, where she had planted a garden in the backyard because her mother had always kept a garden. I set my bag down by the door and walked into the living room. He was standing near the window. He had that calm about him that I'd learned to distrust. Hands in his pockets. Easy posture. The expression of a man who believes the meeting is already going the way he planned. "Russell," he said, using my first name the way he always did when he wanted to level the field between us. "I think it's time we talked openly. About the accounts, about the trust, about what you've been keeping from your own daughter, about her inheritance." I sat down in the armchair across the room. My daughter took the seat nearest the door. She was watching the floor. "I haven't kept anything from my daughter," I said. "Every protection her mother and I put in place was designed for her benefit. That's not secrecy. That's responsible planning." He tilted his head. Responsible planning. He knew nothing about. "She knew her mother was thorough," I said. "And she knew I've been handling our estate with Gerald Hutchins since before you and she ever met." He shifted slightly. "A small movement, but I'd been watching him for 4 years, and I noticed it." The folder he'd photographed mentioned a specific account number. He'd been trying to find out what was in it. "Let me be direct," he said. "I have a right, as her husband, to understand the full picture of what she stands to inherit. Any assets that become hers become part of our household. That's how marriage works." I looked at him for a moment before responding. "You signed a prenuptial agreement 3 days before the wedding. Gerald walked you through every clause. That agreement specifies clearly that all assets held in trust prior to and during the marriage remain separate property. They are my daughter's, not your household's." His jaw moved slightly. "That agreement," he started, "is fully enforceable," I said. "Gerald confirmed it this afternoon. I spoke with him while I was still at the gate in Phoenix. My daughter was very still. He recovered quickly. He always did." He looked at her and let his expression soften into something practiced. "Honey," he said, "I'm not trying to take anything. I'm trying to make sure we're treated like partners, like a real family. Your father has been managing your future behind closed doors, your entire adult life, and you've been letting him. Don't you want to know what's actually yours?" She finally raised her eyes, but she looked at me, not at him. "Dad," she said quietly. Her voice had something fragile in it. "You should have told me more. I had a right to understand what Mom set up." That hit me differently than his accusations had. This was the thing I'd feared, not his anger, hers. Her sense that I'd kept her at a distance when I should have brought her in. "You're right," I said, holding her gaze. "I should have sat with you sooner. Your mother made me promise to tell you everything when the time was right." I kept waiting for that moment. "That was a mistake, I own." He seized on it immediately. "So you admit you've been withholding?" "I've been cautious," I said. "There's a difference. And the time you're currently taking to exploit this conversation is telling." He stood up straighter. "I'm not exploiting anything. I'm advocating for my wife." I reached into my bag and set the notebook on the coffee table. A black leather notebook, 2 years' worth of entries, tight handwriting on every page. "November 3rd, I said, opening to the first marked section. 3 weeks after the wedding, you told my daughter she should get her name added to your car title for insurance purposes. What you didn't tell her was that your car had a lien on it she didn't know about. I have the documentation from the DMV. I turned a few pages. February the following year, you told her the business account needed a co-signer to secure the lease on the office space. She co-signed. The lease was never executed. The $42,000 went to a personal account in your name. I have bank records." He had stopped, looking relaxed. "April of last year, you told her you were in Charlotte meeting with a partner about a contract. I have a receipt forwarded to me by someone who knew your name and thought I should see it, from a restaurant in Boca Raton. You were not in Charlotte." The silence in that room was a particular kind of silence. The kind that only comes when the truth lands somewhere that can't be walked back from. My daughter made a sound I won't forget. Not quite a word. Something between a breath and a question. That's not, he started. My daughter's phone was already in her hand. I could see her scrolling. She'd pulled up their shared cloud storage, the one where their devices backed up automatically, where his location history lived, where his messages to the account he thought was private had been quietly saving to her iPad for the better part of a year, because they shared an Apple ID and he'd never thought to check. She stood up. She didn't yell. Eleanor had never yelled either, and her daughter was her mother's child in ways that still took my breath away sometimes. She just looked at him with a clarity that I recognized, like something that had been blurry for a long time had finally come into focus. I need you to leave tonight, she said. He tried 3 more things. He said she was overreacting. He said I had manipulated her. He said the prenup wouldn't hold up, and Gerald wasn't as good a lawyer as I thought. Each one landed with less force than the last, because she had stopped listening the way people stop listening when they've already made a decision. The Lexus payments, she said, are in my name, on a car I've never driven once. That was the one that closed it for her, not the restaurant receipt, not the missing 42,000. 18 months of payments on a car she had never sat in. Pack what you need for tonight, she said. The rest we can arrange through attorneys. He left close to midnight. She stood at the window and watched the Lexus back out of the driveway, and I sat in Eleanor's chair and waited. When the taillights disappeared, she came and sat on the floor next to my chair, the way she used to when she was small and tired. I put my hand on the top of her head. I should have seen it, she said. You loved him. That's not a character flaw. I kept defending him to you, I know. She was quiet for a little while. Then she said, tell me about the trust. Tell me everything Mom set up. No more keeping it from me. So I told her. We stayed up past 2 in the morning while I walked her through every piece of it. Eleanor's life insurance, structured so the payout went directly into the trust. The house in Brentwood, held separately from any marital claim. The investment accounts that had been growing quietly for 30 years while we drove used cars and cooked at home and took 1 vacation a year. It's worth about 2.1 million, I told her. Most of it is the house and the portfolio. Your mother was extremely careful with money. We never spent it trying to look like we had it. My daughter was quiet for a long time. Then she said, she knew, didn't she? Even before she died. She knew I'd need this. Eleanor understood things I'm still learning, I said. She loved you with the part of herself that could see around corners. She asked to see her mother's letter. Eleanor had written it 6 weeks before she died. I'd kept it in the safe deposit box waiting for the right moment. I went to my bag and took it out, still in the original envelope with our daughter's name in Eleanor's careful handwriting. She read it at the kitchen table while I made coffee. I heard her crying softly, and I let her be. When she finished, she set it down flat on the table and pressed her hands over it. She said, tell Dad I figured it out. That was the last line. She had. Eleanor had written it as a hope and a bet, and it had come true in the hardest possible way. 5 months later, on a Sunday afternoon in October, my daughter came by the house with a container of the chicken and rice soup she'd started making every few weeks from Eleanor's recipe. We ate at the kitchen table, and the afternoon light came through the window the way it does in fall, slanted and gold. And she told me about someone she'd met. His name was Patrick. She'd met him through a colleague at the hospital. He was a physical therapist, divorced with a young son, careful with his words, and apparently his money too. He showed me his budget spreadsheet on our 3rd date, she said, half laughing. He wanted me to know up front what he was working with, said he didn't believe in surprises. I felt something ease in my chest that had been wound tight for years. What did you do with the spreadsheet? I asked. She smiled. I told him mine was more complicated and we'd need a longer conversation. Good answer, I said. We sat with our soup for a while. Then she said, I've been thinking about Mom's trust, about what we should do with some of it. I looked up. I don't need all of it to live on, she said. I have my job, I have this house, and there's a fund at Vanderbilt for nursing students who are first-generation college students or who've lost a parent. I was thinking about making a contribution. In Mom's name. I set my spoon down. We could call it the Eleanor June Whitfield Nursing Scholarship, she said, using Eleanor's full name the way she always had when she meant something, and use part of the trust each year to help a student who couldn't otherwise finish their degree. I didn't say anything for a moment, not because I didn't have words, but because the ones I had were too full. She would have been so proud of you, I finally said. She clinked her glass against mine. She would have had something smart to say about it. That was true. Eleanor always had something smart to say. We spent the rest of the afternoon working it out. By the time my daughter left, we'd sketched the outline of a scholarship that would fund 2 nursing students a year. Kids who had lost a parent and needed help making it to graduation. I stood on the porch and watched her drive away, and then I went inside and stood for a moment in front of Eleanor's photograph on the mantel, the one from our trip to Ash Hill, where she was laughing at something I'd said, her head tilted back, entirely herself. We did it, I said. The house was quiet around me. Outside, the leaves were coming down from the maple in the front yard, the one Eleanor had planted the year our daughter was born. Still standing, still giving shade. The safe deposit box at First National still holds every document, every page of that notebook, every protection Eleanor spent her final months putting in place. But it means something different now. It's not a fortress anymore. It's a record of what love looks like when it's willing to plan ahead and do the hard work and refuse to look away. He walked out of that house with nothing he hadn't come in with, because Eleanor had understood something he never did. The wealth in that family was never the accounts or the house or the policy number. It was in the way we'd raised our daughter, in the values she carried, in the fact that when the moment came, she had looked at the truth and chosen it. Even when it hurt, Eleanor had known she wouldn't be here for that moment, so she made sure, in every way she could think of, that our daughter would be ready for it anyway. If there is one thing I hope you take away from this story tonight, it is this. The most important things you leave your children cannot be put in an account. Protect what you built. Tell your kids the truth about what matters before you run out of time to say it. Money finds its level. Wisdom travels farther. Thank you for being here tonight. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave me a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Russell. I'll be right here